Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. As I always say on Wednesday morning, it's always a good day when I get to hang out with you for an hour.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like we normally begin our shows with our gratitude moments, I'll start by saying I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have sound mind. 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. A mother who's alive, who still has sound mind, and I get a chance to tap into her energy of love, roof over my head, food to eat, and then just the challenges in my life that's helping me become a better person, a better thinker. I see the growth of who I am spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, and I'm grateful for the awareness to see that as well.
Yeah, beautiful. So I echo everything you said, but more seriously, I mean, the standard things I just notice every day are I have indoor plumbing. I have electricity and a refrigerator with mostly good food in it. And I'm just really grateful for that. That I get up every morning and I'm able to do things I really care about as a writer and a coach and an educator. Relatively healthy, mentally and physically. And one other thing I'm grateful for is I rent a house, a really nice house, I probably couldn't afford to buy where I'm living. And the landlord, I have built it. He built the house a decade ago. He's just a great guy. And if there's ever anything wrong, like he takes care of the grounds and everything, and I have to take care of, obviously the inside of the house. He loves to work. And so like he's out there like rebuilding like a restraining wall now to keep, because it's built on the side of a hill. And he's just so good at it. He just knows how to do things that I don't know how to do. So I'm just grateful for people who have expertise, whether it's kind of like blue collar physical stuff or professional stuff like a surgeon, who all of us together with these different levels of expertise keep society moving along despite political and cultural arguments and polarizations. There's this underlying glue of everyday people who do good work. And so I'm just really grateful for that as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I concur with you 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been the Fully Human Connections podcast, and we've been building over the last, year or so on the things you've written at your book. Which one I'm going to bring that on the screen right now. So why don't you walk us into today's topic that we're going to discuss from excerpt from your book?
Yeah. So what I'd like to do today, and again, I know people can see that, but the subtitle is, the feminine, the masculine, our collective national shadow. And what we've been looking at is the side of America that many Americans tend to deny or make believe isn't true, both historically and in current events as well. And in the last couple of weeks, I mean, and the thing I'm both proud of with the book, but also I'm saddened by with the book, is as I see the unfolding of the news in America every day, the odds are very good that the issues that you and I have been talking about, the issues that are in the book, are not going to be resolved in any real way during my lifetime. In many ways, they continue to get worse. And as I see some of the talk around the presidential election and 2024 election, which is a year and a half or so away, and some of what people are saying, and some movements toward really retracting or reeling in or taking rights away from some Americans, and making it harder for some Americans who don't fit into some other people's views of how they should be. I want to just read a quick quote that's in the book. It's right at the end of the chapter on African American history, and it's from Ibram Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning. And I just want to read that as a foundation for today's conversation, and then kind of expand what he says about race, and expand it out to like all of the kind of dominations and discriminations we have around gender and anything else that we have as human beings. So let me just read the quote first, and then we can kind of tie it into current events. So he speaks about, in his research on the origins and the perpetuation of racist ideas. This is the quote now. He says, "I did not see a singular historical force taking steps forward and backward on race. I saw a dual and dueling history of racial progress and the simultaneous progression of racism. I saw the anti-racist force of equality and the racist force of inequality marching forward, progressing in rhetoric, in tactics, and in policies. And racist progress has consistently followed racial or anti-racist progress." So I just really was struck by that when I read it in the book some years ago. And I see that now, and I'm going to pick on one state in particular because it's because of what's been going on down there. I'm going to focus on Florida, where there's all kinds of restrictions on how American history can be taught. There are increasing restrictions about how diversity, equity, and inclusion programs can be offered by the government. There are restrictions on transsexuals and how they can have parades or express themselves. So whether one agrees on, because probably right now the trans movement is one of the real flashpoints in this country from everything I read. I err on the side of whether I agree with someone or not. If they're not harming anybody else, I accept them as a human being. And I have more issues with gun violence than I do with transvestites, personally, because transvestites aren't out there shooting up schools and supermarkets. But more to the point, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, is going to announce his presidential candidacy sometime today, supposedly. And he has basically said that his, platform would be to make America increasingly more like Florida, which is what he's done in Florida in terms of restricting what's okay to say about history, what's not okay. It's basically restricting freedom of speech, freedom of academic freedom. That was redundant the way I said that, and limiting the rights of certain human beings based on his beliefs. And for me, as somebody who believes in the ideal of America, of what the founding fathers, with all their faults, they were, slave owners themselves, but what they gave us in terms of the documents, including the ability to amend their original writing and their incitement of us to move toward a more perfect union. I see someone like DeSantis and his former colleague Trump as being the antithesis of the ideal of this American experiment. And I just want to point to paraphrase Kendi, that in American history, there's a dual and dueling history of progress for both increasing human rights, equal rights for all Americans, and limiting the rights of some Americans. And I think that's a real dangerous movement that Kendi really nailed, speaking specifically about race, but I think that can be extrapolated out to speak about other issues as well. So I know that was kind of a mouthful, but it's tying in, what's in the book to what's happening currently moving forward in the country. So I'll take a breath and let you talk.
Well, definitely appreciate the topic. And I think, Kendi is definitely a great source. And I think the work he's doing in his books have definitely are needed. The discussions are needed. But I've always, and again, I'm not saying this as a critique of him. I think it needs to be multiple voices on the platform. I'm a person that just really believes that at this particular time, the direction that we're moving in now, I don't see personally the value of convincing others to think different. I think I think that energy is, I think people are really entrenched in how they thinking, or as you talk about their cultural givens, I think most people are really entrenched in that right now, particularly people who are folks who are in survival mode. I don't think you're gonna get any of those folks to change their minds because they have other things that are more pressing to them. And if you're in survival mode, more likely you have a victim mentality, and you know exactly in your mind whether it's true or not. The narrative you believe is, you know, why you're in the situation you're in, and it's going to be external to you. Either it's going to be a power structure or a group of people or someone like that that's holding you back, and nothing's going to change your mind from that unless you are seeking personal growth. And it takes a lot to be in that abyss of survival mode and say to yourself, I see a beacon of life, of a light of love and growth. And I'm going to choose that despite the narratives I'm being fed, because narratives make me feel good. Narratives take away the blame from myself, and I don't have to hold myself accountable. I can blame others, right? Yeah. So, and that's why I look at where we are right now with the whole DEI and you know, working to include that kind of education in the schools. I'm more a proponent, and I've said this before, that I think that we should just continue to do what's always worked for us. And I'm talking about, when I say us, I'm talking about the Black community, which is we teach our kids that ourselves, and we lead through example. And now, again, I'm not going to go out here and publicly fight that activity, but what I'm saying is the effort, the energy that's put into that could be better used to making sure that that's taught in our homes, and let there be the example of how those kids who understand, like myself, I'm a proponent of, I'm not just a proponent, I'm an example of someone whose life didn't change until I read Malcolm X's autobiography. And that gave me purpose, and it gave me direction in my life when I was 18 and a high school dropout. And so for me, I understand the importance of understanding our history as a result of giving me purpose. That gave me purpose in my life. That put me on the path, and I began to consume Black history and Black literature, from James Baldwin to Langston Hughes to, you know, understanding Paul Robeson, understanding that gave me a great respect and admiration, and as well as feelings of pride in my race and who I am. It wasn't anything about being anti-white and hating white folks from there. It just really a pride of Black consciousness and success, and that's what still fuels me today. And I think trying to get someone else, and I liken this to, if someone was to come to me and say, well, there's been conversations about folks who, well, there's been some great men who happen to be gay in the world, and they've done some great things. But if you force me to accept that and read that, I'm going to have a certain reaction to that, a certain pushback. But because I'm on a path to become fully human, which is the basis of our show, I'll seek that out myself, because that person, not because he's gay, but because he's a human being, and he stood up for justice, and he stood up for liberty. And I'm curious to figure out why he did that and what's his story, despite the fact that he may be gay or white or Jewish or whatever else he may have been. It's the fact that this person was a great human being, and I'm going to hold this person up and lift this person up for the work they've done. And that's why I think that I would like to see the country move in. And if not, just really building alignment with people who are along those lines of, again, removing themselves from the group dynamic and seeing ourselves as individuals. And then once you understand that you're on a journey, you're going to be committed to growth, you'll become committed to becoming more fully human, then connect tribes around that alignment.
Yeah. So no, I love what you said there, and I want to reintroduce one of the kind of guidelines that appears early in the book, in the first chapter, when I just put off some things like about the importance of development, the importance of truth, the importance of love. I just, some things that follow throughout the entire book. And one of the things is skillful means, which I really got from Buddhist studies. The idea of just skillful means, where it has nothing to do with Buddhism per se, but it's basically what you want your mechanic to have, so he doesn't over tighten the bolt or the screw. It's what you want the surgeon to have, so he makes the incision the correct length, just deep enough, and preferably on the right patient. It's what the a parent or teacher has, because they speak and deal with children in a chronologically and developmentally appropriate way. So all those are examples of skillful means. A good chef who can prepare the meal, whatever it is, exactly right. If you want the pasta al dente, if you want the steak medium rare, or whatever. So skillful means are really important. And yeah, I agree with you that it's really hard to change somebody else's mind. I mean, I know that as a coach. I don't try to change anybody's mind. If somebody comes to me and they have something they want to talk about, I try to create a container in which they can change their own minds. I have certain skills around that, but I don't go out in the street and say, "Come here, I want to coach you," because I think you could benefit from what I know or what I think, and that would be a fool's errand. But going back to one of the examples, like what's going on in Florida and has gone on throughout the country, there's been, just one of the examples, like the DEI trainings, diversity, equity. Some people say equity, some people say equality. The DEI and inclusion trainings. A major problem with those has been that those who offered them, whether it was in an organization or in government, weren't skillful. In fact, I would say they were no good at it because they hadn't done their own personal work. And they turned these trainings, which were intended to make people who were not aware of racist, sexist, homophobic behaviors, more aware of them, which I think is not a bad goal. But what they turned it into was making people feel guilty. They made it into kind of a scolding and a finger wagging thing. And that came from the left. It was really unskillfully done. Not every training was like that. There were some that were wonderful, but a lot of them were just horribly done. And then the right jumped all over it, which I think they should have. And they turned it into, DEI is stupid, bad, and it's ruining our kids or whatever. Now, both of those are problematic. The unskillful manifestation of the training and then the dismissal of it as not necessary or even bad. And that's the point with now what you said about your own example, which I love. Here's the thing that I don't know and none of my teachers have been able to tell me about. What is it? Now, if you know, maybe we can get, or you can get rich with it. I won't, because I'm just the guy that asked the question. But what is it that allows, and I don't care if it's somebody who's white, black, yellow, brown, red, green, blue, or purple, regardless of, any human being, what is it that allows someone at a given point in their life to become increasingly aware and then commit to, as you say, becoming more fully human, to use the language that you and I use? And what is it that allows somebody else to go through their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and die without ever having any desire or inclination to grow into an increasingly inclusive, comprehensive, balanced, and complex view of the world? Because that's the real sticking point. Because when you speak, you're speaking through a specific developmental worldview that's done a lot of work and has learned a lot, I'm going to say on its own, speaking of the worldview, not you. And I am too, in my own way. I've done my own work. So that's why you and I kind of met that way, because we were attuned to each other's worldview. So the sticking point is, beyond being an exemplar. I mean, you're an exemplar. You teach by your example. I try to do the same. What is it that keeps certain people stuck and that allows other people to grow, and that keeps certain people stuck in such a way that they'll even do things that makes their own life worse? Because I'm just reminded of this, and now I'm going to stop talking for a moment. A decade or more ago, a book by an author named Thomas Franks, the title of the book was What's the Matter with Kansas? And this is a guy who grew up in Kansas. And he was just following the thread that all of these kind of farming communities, mostly Christian farming communities and mostly white, consistently voted for congressional, state legislature, and presidential candidates who did things that hurt their livelihood. So they actually voted against their own best interests. And primarily it was around the Christian piece. It primarily voted Republican because Republicans are kind of identified with Christianity. And they consistently voted for candidates who hurt them, who hurt their livelihoods. And I don't remember all the details of the book, but that's kind of what we're talking about. So, you know, my life sucks. I'm speaking hypothetically now, and I'm blaming those people for it. And I want those people, they're the ones that can help me. So I vote for those people and I don't get any help, but I keep voting for them. So, you know, what's the magic potion, metaphorically speaking? You know, what is it that allows you to open up and say, oh, I need to take care of myself and figure this stuff out because nobody out there is doing it for me. You know, there might be an example, or as you mentioned Langston Hughes and Malcolm X and, you know, Paul Robeson and others. And I had the same people in my life, not, you know, those three, but others as well. So what is it that makes you seek and makes me seek, and that prevents others from never seeking? That's the thing. That's the thing that I constantly look for when I coach, when I teach, when I read, and I don't know what that is. So,
you know,
can you resolve that for me, King?
Like you said, I wish I knew the answer.
Yeah.
I just have an opinion, on it. And I opine to say that it comes down to purpose. That's why I really think it does. At least, speaking for myself specifically, my life changed when I discovered my purpose, when I began to understand. And Malcolm X's book gave me that. That's what I needed. I needed someone to let me know that don't just go to school. Don't just get an education. Like my parents, and it's not their fault. That's what the system does. Yeah. They were saying pretty much what all parents were taught to teach their kids: go to school, get a good education, get a good job, right? And that's the process you go through. And that, to me, and I believe my generation, we just didn't see that. It was like, this is not making sense to us, because the good job that you're advocating for, that you all have, is not where we want to be. And I grew up in a suburban neighborhood. It wasn't high class or high income. It was pretty much probably middle income, lower to middle income. But we all had our own houses. We all had our own, in St. Louis, we like to say we had our own back porches. We spent time. So we wasn't forced upon each other like inner city individuals are. And we had a great culture in our neighborhood where respect was there of all our elders. To this day, I still won't curse around someone who's older than me. That's still ingrained in me. I catch myself, watching what I say, because that's how I was raised. And anyone who was an elder had the I would say the freedom at that time my parents gave them to autonomy to discipline us if they wanted to. So it was a strong respect for the elders. So now, to answer your question again, I'm only answering from my perspective, but folks who I see who don't have the interest of self-growth, who don't seek to become more fully human or better people, not better at a particular profession or a skill or something like that, a better singer or athlete, but a better person, is lacking that tie into purpose. Like, I never hear a person, and I haven't done enough research to know this for a fact, I'm just saying from my own research and observation, that I don't never hear purpose in their language. That this is my purpose in life. This is what I'm committed to. Because see, once you understand that this is now why you're put on this earth, as opposed to something you should do, that to me is a paradigm shift. That's like Stephen R. Covey talks about in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that the paradigms are the maps in our mind. And if you have the wrong map, you can be in New York, and someone gives you a map of Kansas City, and you're trying to navigate New York. No matter how positive you are, how much you pray, how much you sit here and try to think about things, and how hard you work, you're not going to be able to navigate New York with Kansas City's map. You have to change your paradigm, right? And that paradigm shift can only come by looking at something that you are aligned with, which is the purpose in life, and saying, I was put here for more than just being a doctor or a lawyer, or a singer, or athlete, whatever your profession is, and get married. but I was put here to really make a difference toward humanity in the world. And how I make that is where I have to navigate through life. And at different times in my life, it's gonna manifest differently what that looks like and how that does. Like, and just going back real quick to the topic in the book, that's what I like about Kendi is that, and that's why I've learned never to judge a person, but judge the behavior.
Right.
Even though I may not agree with the way he goes about arguing his perspective, I do see the results of folks who are, how I see his writings being manifested. And that's what I learned from. Like, for example, I didn't know you for 20, 50 years, but I can definitely tell that you're on a path of anti-racist. You're on that path because of the book you've written, your book that you wrote, that shows that you have a growth mindset. You're putting out and you're taking action. You're not just someone who says, yeah, racism is wrong and we shouldn't do anything about it. You doing what he suggests, which is as an anti-racist, you're taking action with that, and you are not just falling in line with the system, but you're doing your part to break apart the system. So that's why I say he has value. His writings has value. His perspective has value. And I just think that everybody has to figure out what's their best way to make the world a better place. And I think if everybody's goal is to become fully human, even though our ways we go about exercising service may look different, but the outcome at the end of the day is if we take care of become more fully human, then people will see that we'll create the energy, it will manifest, and then if we can just really impact one person, and that person goes on to do something great, then I think that's something that's worth living for, and even to this point, worth dying for as well.
Yeah. I love what you said about purpose too, because it reminds me of one of my teachers who you and I have spoken about, and I reference him in the book, is Bill Plotkin. He's a founder of Animist Valley Institute, and he refers to he refers to the soul, capital S soul. He has a very specific definition of that, which is it's not exactly purpose, but it's kind of parallel to it. And he refers to soul as one's place in the world. And he's refined that even further by saying it's a human's unique ecological niche. And he says that everything on the planet has it. So an oak tree has its ecological niche. It knows what it's supposed to do, where it's rooted in the ground. A frog has it. A cloud has it. A rock has it. So they all have it. And humans, we forget that we're part of nature.
Right.
But in fact, every one of us, in Bill's argument, has a unique ecological niche. What in our ecology, what we're here to do, and then the language he uses for the different ways it manifests. And you spoke to this, just different words, is delivery systems. So once I know my purpose or my unique ecological niche, my job for the rest of my life is to find successful delivery systems for bringing my purpose, my gift, to my people, whoever my people happen to be, in quotation marks. So I think that's really important. I mean, the underlying question then becomes, and I want to go back to Covey too, because I love the paradigm shift piece, and two memories come up from that book for me. But what is it then that awakens someone to even be concerned about purpose? I mean, that's the underlying question, because some people can have a job or a series of jobs their whole life and never awaken to the idea of having a purpose. And that's really the question that I'm trying to get at. And again, I'm not asking you to answer it, but the paradigm shift is important. I'm glad you raised that, because in Covey's book, which I haven't looked at in years, but two stories he told stayed with me. And one of them, I think, was originally his. Another one he borrowed from the military. But it's worth saying, this idea of paradigm shift, where there was this Navy commander. He was the captain on a battleship, and he was cruising at night, and you know where I'm going to go with this. And I'll do a short version of it. And this navigator was reading the radar and said, we have, we're on a course to collide with another ship at certain degrees this, certain degrees that. And so the commander says, radio them to change course, X number of degrees to their starboard. and the other radio comes back and says, can't do, you change course. And so the commander gets a little bit egocentric and says, send again, tell them to, because they're getting closer to each other, tell them to, change course this many degrees to their starboard side. And again, it comes back from the other radio, can't do, you change course. And finally the commander says, radio them and say, we're a battleship. And so they send that, and the other one comes back and says, we're a lighthouse. So the commander changed course. Right? So, I mean, and that's just it's funny in a way, whether it's really happened or not, who knows, but it's a great example. Oh, all right. That's a piece of land that I'm about to collide with, not another ship, and I can't control it. So that's the idea of that paradigm shift. Again, there was a good example for the commander to shift his paradigm so he didn't, destroy a multi-billion-dollar, vessel. But in most of our lives, unless we're really fortunate, we don't get that kind of a exact, focused, powerful reason. Oh, I have to shift now, otherwise bad things are going to happen. It happens more subtly often, and that's the magic potion I'm looking for. What is it that, not that people will do what I want them to do, but that more and more of us awaken to this idea of, oh, I'm here for a reason, not just to work for the local department store, like they even have those anymore. I guess Target, or, I was going to say department store, but I guess Target and Kohl's and Walmart are kind of like department stores. That used to be, but not exactly. But not just to work at a local shop or whatever might be a nice place to work too, but what am I really here for? And to really live into that fully, that purpose, that unique place in the world. I mean, because I agree with you. I mean, once you have that, you become more fully human, unless you misunderstand it. And Plotkin's really clear that when he talks about unique ecological niche, it's not to make a lot of money. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a unique gift that you're here. It's a way of serving humanity and the planet itself, not just humanity. It's not a task or a duty. It's a purpose and a place, to be. And once you find that, you do good in the world. You really do.
Well, see, you said several things in there that, I think as a good listener, and I say I like to pride myself on being a good listener because I work towards that. Not from an ego that I think I'm just naturally a good listener. It's like Stephen R. Covey talks about, we have to learn to be good listeners. We're not taught that in our school system. And is that I extrapolate keywords from what you're saying that I align with. I look for alignment. It's like, if you imagine the words be on the screen, I can just now connect to them. And you said systems. We talk about Bill Plotkin. And like systems, they got my, I love systems in the context that you're speaking systems. Now we're talking about, we get away from the personal things about individuals. Now we understand that there's something greater that's governing us. Number two, you talked about service. And that's where I think, going back to your question, again, I think that you have to want to serve. So the purpose can't be, well, I'm just going to be a Hollywood producer and create some great films so I can make a lot of money. No. Or I'm going to be a great basketball player and I'm going to, I want to be the number one scorer in the world, score the most points. No, it's about service at the end of the day. So you may be in one form of or one period of your life is to serve toward being a basketball player and you're improving people's lives. But can you use that influence like Brian has to let people know that you're also fully human and you make a difference in the world? You begin to influence people. They see you beyond just a basketball player or a person who, like Steven Spielberg, see you beyond just a filmmaker, George Lucas, beyond just a filmmaker, see you greater than that. That's where I'm getting at. I think that, but to answer your question, I think it comes down to the want first. You have to want that. Now, what triggers that want? I think it's a variety of things. Again, this is just my opinion, not that I know for a fact. I think it's your environment. I think it's your cultural giving, as you talk about in your book. I think my parents, for example, my father was a person who was a servant leader in one of the neighborhoods. Um, he was a police officer, as well as he was very active in the community. So that was there. My mother was considered to be one of the big mamas of our community, where folks would always come to our house, and she would feed folks not only food but feed them love. That carried on when she moved from St. Louis to Washington D.C. and she would actually babysit, despite my brothers and my arguments to the contrary. But my building became predominantly Ethiopian, and we always felt they were taking advantage of my mom because she would babysit their kids from like 6 in the morning. They wake my mother up with their child, and she would watch them to 6 p.m. and they would pay her $20. And it's like, babysitters make this exorbitant amount of money, and these people don't pay you $20. We see them come in with TVs and all that. But my mom was like, no, that's what she felt, and all those kids grew up to love her, and so that she felt the desire to serve. So again, for me, I saw examples of that in my life. So that to me was instilled in me, whether I wanted to accept it or not, that I had to have this desire to serve. So it's like once that seed is there, and you begin to read books and you watch TV shows and you go to church or whatever your religious indoctrination may be, your dogma that you're receiving, and it talks about service, it begins to water that seed, it begins to nurture that seed. And then how you serve is your purpose. When you discover, how can I best serve in my life? So that's what I would say. If a person hasn't have that want to figure out what is my purpose. Like, if you're not asking yourself that, you're not curious, you're not asking yourself those questions, and then you feel that you already know all the answers. Like, I know why this works this way. I know why this happens. It's because X. It's because of systematic racism. It's because of, and again, all these things exist. It's like, for example, it's a person saying, well, why you didn't go to work today? Because it was raining. Okay, well, yeah, that's a reason. It's a good reason. Yeah, it was raining for everybody else. We all could have said that, right? We all could have stayed at home and said because it's raining. And that's how I look at systematic racism. Yeah, it's there. You can't argue the fact. You can look outside and see it's raining. You can see the systems in place, but they don't stop everything. You can navigate through that system if you begin to first, as I advocate, remove yourself from that group dynamic, see yourself as an individual, because if you see yourself as this Black person navigating through racism, then you're going to now have a different perspective as a person saying, I'm a servant leader. I'm committed to service moving through racism. Now it's a commitment. I have to get up. It's like Anthony Robbins talks about this, and I always use this analogy. I think it's a perfect analogy. He says that, when commitment comes down to play, it's like having a child. The doctors tell you that your child is healthy. Once you hear that, your child is going to be healthy. You're committed to making that child walk. No matter how many times the child falls, you're not going to say, well, he's falling for the 15th time. He's just not going to be able to walk. He's going to be able to crawl through life. You're not going to give up. You're going to stay committed to making sure that child walks no matter what, right? Yeah. And so that's what I mean when you tap into that your purpose. You don't look at things you go through life because you don't get the outcome you want or plan for as failure. Look at this. Oh, those are teachable moments. What did I learn from that? What am I going to experience by putting forth this effort? And every activity now becomes a lesson or opportunity to learn. And then, now again, you don't just grow with that mentality. You grow with that mentality by continuing to feed yourself. So then it goes back to, what are you feeding yourself, right? What are you, like, if you do is consume yourself with, whether it's Fox News or MSNBC, and that becomes 60% of the information that you take in, right? You're not reading any other books, you're not watching other videos on YouTube, you're not taking any other information source in outside of the work you do. So you go to work 9 to 5, do your job, and then when you come, your drive to work is political radio from one of those different perspectives. Then you come home and you watch Fox News or MSNBC from one of those perspectives. Then more likely you're going to be stagnant in your growth, because one of those two things are going to tell you I'm going to create fear in you, but from saying this was happening to you from this perspective, or I'm going to create victimness in you from this other one saying this is what's happening to you. So you can't change and you can't grow, and this is how it's always been. And that's why I think the show that you and I are doing and the work that you're doing with, Fully Human at Work with Kent is so important, because you need those resources to begin to open people's minds and give people other avenues to say, despite what is going on in my life, despite the racism, despite the bigotry, despite the sexism, despite the war that we're having and the political ideology that we constantly see in that strife, there is a seed, or I liken it to being in a dark room and it's completely black, but then a ray of sunlight breaks through one of the little beacons, the little cracks in the window, or the tape that's preventing the light, the full sunlight from coming in, and you see a little sunlight on the floor, and you're like, wow, it's sunny outside. If I can take away more of this tape, expose more, I can let more sunlight in, and that sunlight is going to brighten your day. And that's the work I think we have to do as human beings in our journey to become more fully human, is continue to pull away that tape to let more sunlight in, to realize that there is a beautiful world out there if we allow ourselves. But we got to do the work. It's not going to just magically, the black tape across our windows is not just going to magically disappear. We have to put forth the work to make it happen.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think it's when we do that work, when you show up as the current iteration of your fully human self, or when I do, when somebody else does, just showing up that way has an impact on others. I'm not saying you show up and the world changes. I mean, I wish that were the case.
Right.
But if you spend enough time with people, they get a sense of that. Like in the last 2 or 3 weeks, something that you and I haven't had time to speak about. So I've done a couple of radio interviews, 3 of them, in fact. One was a podcast, which hasn't actually aired yet, out of New York City, which was, kind of leans left. The other 2, I have a couple more coming up. The other 2, though, were small AM radio stations, one in the middle of Virginia and one in town of Brownwood, Texas, which is outside of Dallas, I believe. And they were both, identified as Christian radio stations, play gospel and bluegrass music, but they had some interest in interviews. Long story short, they're interviewing me about the book. One of them actually asked for a copy of the book, so he had flipped through it. He didn't have enough time to read it because it's kind of thick. But in both cases, the interviewers, let me just cut to the chase. It's really clear that if, and you and I have said this in the past in our conversations, if we forget about, for this moment, the far right crazy people, and forget about the far left crazy people, and I'm not going to get into what I mean by each of those, but we can come back to it if we have time. And we just look at, what we might call the center of the political spectrum, and those who are, a bit right of center and a bit left of center, which is where most Americans live. That 3 areas: center, a little bit left, a little bit right. Everybody's scared. And I haven't spoken to anyone, including these, kind of right-leaning, more conservative stations, where we couldn't find a common area to agree on. There were a couple of, one question tried to tie in the problem with, the southern border of the United States with Mexico, Hunter Biden, and China. And so I had to navigate that question because I don't know any connection between the southern border, Hunter Biden, and China. There are stories about that, but I don't know that. But everything else we spoke about, the concerns around gun violence, even among gun owners and our NRA members, and you're a gun owner and you're concerned with gun violence. So we agree on that. But the general fear of the direction of the country, the polarization, the dysfunctions in Congress, there's way more agreement just on the left and just on the right of center than there is disagreement. They disagree on maybe how to resolve some of the issues, but the concerns are the same. And that's not a profitable talking point for mainstream news.
Or politicians.
or politicians, because if it's not, if there's not animosity, if there's not, clunking of heads and viewpoints, it's not sensational, and nobody's going to tune in. So there's a profit motive for ignoring those areas of the right and the left that generally agree. Such as, the Supreme Court proved this. Generally we agree on assault weapons and stricter gun legislation, not getting rid of guns. Nobody's proposing that, but stopping this crazy shooting stuff. And the vast majority of Americans, over 66%, want women to have the right to choose. And the Supreme Court ignored that. So there is this agreement, closer to the center where most Americans live, but it's ignored by politicians, most politicians. There are some who try to speak up, but they get pounded down to the pavement. But very few performance news commentators, the people who get paid to perform news commentary, the celebrity people, because they make, 7 or 8 figures a year by selling sensationalism. They have no motive to stop it. So that's that's one of the reasons where we get stuck. And none of them that I've experienced, even some that I might agree with a little bit in terms of where they stand on an issue, are working towards being more fully human, at least not in their public lives. Maybe privately they go home to their families and they're a different person, which is problematic to begin with, because if you can't bring it to work, then, and you think you have to leave it at home, then there's this kind of dichotomy and schizophrenia that's not healthy.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think, where people, going back to your original question, I think that, what triggers a person to want to begin to ask that questions, want to put them on a course and become more fully human, it has to be the desire to be happy and fulfilled. And, because becoming more fully human, the value is intrinsic. It's not extrinsic. And our society teaches us to focus on the extrinsic values, because that's what capitalism tells us, things you can buy, And I went through that myself when I was in my early 20s, when I finally got my computer career and began to develop a career. And I was making a lot of money, making more money than my parents made, and most people in my neighborhood was making or had made. And I thought I could buy happiness. I thought happiness came as the result of, let me get this new car, let me get this car, let me get this motorcycle, let me buy this jewelry, let me, and I realized the more I purchased, and then I began to purchase so much I couldn't purchase anymore with my liquid cash, and I had to take on debt. And that led to the feeling of depression and slavery, feeling of I'm trapped into this system now. And it wasn't until I realized I had to go through that experience that taught me that, no, happiness is not external. It's like, you ever heard that Dr. Wayne Dyer talks about this, the cat and the old cat, the young cat. I don't know if you heard that story before, but
go ahead. Yeah.
It's this old cat in this alley, and he's walking down the alley and he sees this young cat chasing his tail. And he asks the cat, "What are you doing?" And the young cat says, "Well, someone told me happiness was in my tail, so I'm trying to get it. I'm chasing it." And the old cat says, "Oh, wow. Someone else told me as well that happiness is in my tail, but I walk down the street and my tail follows me. Happiness follows me." So it goes back to the perspectives on how you see things. And I think most people in our society teaches us to chase happiness, and that's fleeting. It's like taking drugs. It's never going to happen. You're never going to find happiness. You get the feeling, you get the sense, you get the smell, but you'll never get the feeling of what it feels like. And that's why I think that it comes down. You got to stop wanting to be happy. And I think the shift comes, the paradigm shift. I want to make others happy. And once you begin to start putting yourself on that path, then that's going to bring the intrinsic value to yourself. Just think about the gifts you've received in your life that were material. You probably can't remember most of them, but you can always remember the feeling that you had when you gave somebody a gift of kindness and how they felt. You can remember that back from when I was 7 years old. I, helped this girl that was crying, I gave her my lollipop. The way she looked at me when I gave her the lollipop. People tell those kind of stories, because that intrinsic feeling, that value that you got. So that's what I think it's going to have to come down to, is that once we get to the point where we can shut off the noise that is the media, the noise that is from, I call them puppets, these puppets that are constantly just playing a role within the system. Once you turn that noise off and say, I want to be in charge of my life, the Matrix, that's the best example. Once you take that red pill or that blue pill, I forgot which one of the pills freed you, but whatever the pill it was that gave you freedom, once you take that pill and you realize, wow, it's not beautiful out there. I can't taste this steak anymore. It's not steak I'm eating. It's the image of it, ideal of a steak. Once we make those decisions, that's what puts us on the right path.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I don't remember which pill either, so got to make sure we get that right. Oh no, what did he say about the red one again? I forget.
Exactly. Well, we reached a point, where I think it's, time for you to kind of, because we talked around it, but of course we always like to. Our goal is to put people on a path to become more fully human, not just talk about the problems, but put people on some concrete steps they can take to put them on the right path. So what would you say next steps we can take now?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to something we've spoken about, I don't know how many episodes ago, but it's relevant for this particular moment. So it could be the most important question we ever ask ourselves as human beings. I'm not sure, but it's one of the top three for sure. And it's simply, who am I really? Asking that question. And there are lots of ways to ask the question, lots of ways to answer it. But here are three ways that will give you different types of answers. So if you answer, who am I really, from a body-mind perspective, I'm just going to speak about myself. So you can say, okay, I'm 5'6", 135 pounds, second generation Italian-American, teacher, coach, blah, 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 blah. And kind of discuss my roles that I play in my life and how I look and how tall I am and all that. That's the body mind. If you ask it from a soul perspective, getting into this idea of purpose, or at Bill Plotkin's language, my unique place in the world, or my unique ecological niche, it's a much deeper and more nuanced answer. So it's more like a metaphor or an archetype as opposed to a job and a body appearance. And then if you ask it and answer it from a spiritual perspective, and I'm going to just speak through my bias now as I explain what I mean by spiritual. I believe that there's one spirit. I don't care. I do care, but people call it God, call it the universe, call it spirit, call it whatever. Call it what you want. I'm not going to get into semantic argument with anybody. But I believe that each of us, all that is a manifestation of spirit. And if I answer, who am I really? And I consider that I'm a manifestation of this miraculous, beautiful unfolding, then my identity shifts yet again. So body, mind is one way to answer it. Soul, or unique place in the world. And then spirit, manifestation of spirit. That question can really help anyone expand. And then you have to keep on revisiting it too. So don't you ask it when you're 35 and say, okay, I'm done with that. I would say ask that question every 5 years and see how your paradigm shifts, see how your perspective shifts. And if it's staying exactly the same, either you're this gifted Dalai Lama type, although he would disagree with me on that, I think, or you're just, completely misunderstanding what you're doing, because it should shift over time if you're growing. If you're becoming more fully human, your answer to who am I really will evolve, in my experience.
Absolutely. That's words of wisdom that we definitely could be look at, and that's where the intent of our show is really to help people believe, first of all, that we can become more fully human, that can be a goal.
Yeah.
And that should be a goal, right? And there's a process for that. And that's why our show want to walk you through. And your book is an excellent example of understanding how you can understand history. And it's important to understand history, but it shouldn't be from the context of, now that I have this understanding of civil rights and slavery, Native Americans, World War II, the women's rights, those things that I need to now look at the oppressive folks who did that with hatred, but understanding of where, again, human beings make their own decisions, why they make them. If you talk about the shadow and the collectiveness, why that's important. I think that your book's an excellent way of beginning to really begin to put a system around that change. And that's why I think it's an excellent resource that folks can really begin to look at. I think people need to understand why they need to read it. And then once they begin to read it, where it's leading us to, or what's leading them to on that journey to become more fully human. So with that being said, let's now shift our attention to the part of the show where we begin to talk about examples of individuals who we believe are doing it or have done it. Because we don't want folks to believe that it's just hypothetical. We're just talking about possibilities that no one ever achieves. And the key thing I really want to point out before I give my example is folks who I identify as fully human examples, I'm sure the same with you, it's a journey, folks. It's not once you get there and it's like, okay, they never make another mistake in their lives and they never do anything wrong ever again. They've reached fully human status and it's complete. No, it's a journey. And along that journey, you begin to see folks make those choices, and that's where it comes down to. Stephen R. Covey again talks about that we were born with birth gifts, and one of the 3 birth gifts is the power of choice. And you make that choice to say, I'm going to be fully human, and today here's how I'm going to exercise that. And so, with that being said, the person I want to give example to or lift up is George Lucas. And I say that mainly because Star Wars had such a huge impact and influence in my life. I saw it when I was 7. It came out in 1977. I saw it when I was 7, and it's pretty much been a part of my life ever since then. His whole world, his whole environment, ecosystem he created. And I want to point him out because and to this day, when you watch Star Wars, it's like, even though he had aliens and everybody else, there was never a hint of, you're an alien, you're different, you're not from this planet, you're from that planet, I'm more powerful, I'm better. He didn't bring that dynamic into that at all, even though it was wars they were fighting over. But it was like the Empire had aliens and everybody else. So it was like you had to choose your political side, but it wasn't because of the differences. It was because of ideological belief of that. And that's why I really want to give him credit, because that was one of the parts that allowed me to just become uninhibited in my thoughts and my beliefs, because he gave me examples of Black people at an early stage in space, and they had significant roles, and their characters were flawed just as they were characters who were strong as well. So, and then he continued to grow that in everything he's done. So that to me, as a storyteller, as a visionary, as a person who set out to say, I want to share my thoughts, he considered all that when he wrote Star Wars. And that's why I think it's one of the greatest legacies that we can tap into in modern man.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it's an amazing series of movies, and what has emerged through that over the years. So, all beginning with him. Yeah, thanks for that one. So I'm going to mention a guy whose work I cite in Healing America's Narratives. His name is Andrew Basovich. He was a West Point grad, a career Army guy, retired after 20 some odd years, served briefly in Vietnam. And I became aware of him. I just was scrolling through channels. I think it was 2005, if I'm not mistaken. And I bumped into an interview on C-SPAN, and he had a new book out called The New American Militarism. And it was a critique of what was going on with American politics and the military. And from a guy who had gone, after he got out of the military, went to Princeton, got a PhD in history and I think world politics or something, and then was teaching up at Boston University, I believe. And he's got about 10 books out now. But in 2 of his books, he speaks about his own development And I forget, this might have been in The Limits of Power or Washington Rules, two of his other books. He basically said, I'm a slow learner. My real education didn't begin until middle age somewhere, when I realized I had become a company man, and I had to begin questioning what had been given to me. This is a paraphrase from memory. I'm not getting exactly right. But in the middle of a really brilliant synthesis of some of his books, America's War in the Greater Middle East, Washington Rules, The Limits of Power, he owned his own need to shift his paradigm. And he really said, I didn't start, my real education began in middle age, in his 50s, is what he was saying. So it's a really great example of what we're talking about, because he's brilliant. He's a polemicist. You want to be prepared if you get into debate with him. And I've never met him. I've just seen him in debate, and he knows his stuff. But he had this humility and vulnerability of being willing to own what I would describe as his own evolving, fully human nature in writing. And once you do that, I mean, the book's out there, so you can't take it back. Mm-hmm. So I really admire that. Again, Andrew Bacevich. And the last thing I'll say is his own son followed in his footsteps, joined the army, and was killed in the Iraq War. Mm. And he wrote briefly about that in the Washington Post. He wrote an op-ed about his feelings as a father and a soldier losing his son. Could have been one of his best. All of his writing is great, but what he said there was really deeply moving. So, Andrew Bacevich is a guy that I admire.
Excellent choices. Definitely someone I'll look up and do some research on as well. Yeah. And so again, I want to thank everyone who listened to the show today, whether you listen to the recording in the future or you listen to us live. We appreciate that. We're grateful for that. Encourage you to engage with us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, or like our videos on YouTube, follow us on Facebook and YouTube, and engage with us. And more importantly, again, the purpose of our show is to let everyone know that there is a pathway that's different than what you're normally hearing from the main media. That we're not saying that anyone is right, whether you're left or right of any political perspective, but your goal should become more fully human. And through that journey that you're going to put yourself on, no one can tell you what's right or what's wrong. You will intrinsically feel it. And that discovery is the best reward you have in life. And so until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., I want to wish everyone more blessings and more productive days. Thank you.